Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast IDP edition. I'm John Macri, and we are rolling through the offseason, continuing to bring you guys, the valued listeners, of course, the high-level data and analysis to dominate your leagues. And today, the focus is on those Dynasty IDPs again, right? Specifically, the defensive backs. That's going to be both safeties and cornerbacks. Not always the position we want to invest highly in, but one that can certainly be ultra productive and return some really nice value for us. And I'm going to rank my top 24 for Dynasty leagues today. So let's get it. Okay, we're going to break down my top 24 Dynasty defensive backs. Last week, I covered my top 24 Dynasty linebackers, which was a lot of fun to do. So if you haven't checked that one out, feel free to go back and listen/watch, whatever you like. But if you have, then today we'll continue to focus on the other positions, specifically defensive backs, typically a much more volatile year-to-year position for IDP, right? Which I've talked about many times in the past. And that'll be something that I do revisit when we get into the 2025 season rankings, which will be very shortly. But for Dynasty purposes, we don't have to worry as much for year-to-year volatility. Like, even though it is a factor, we're trying to look at these players with a multi-year lens. So there's room for all of them to kind of have up and down years, even if we're thinking, about just like a 3 to 4 year window. So instead, we'll be looking for kind of the certain markers that I've found trustworthy across larger sample sizes. So things like player usage and alignment and performance versus expected. So basically how good of tacklers these guys are versus their average peers in the exact same deployments. And then, age and long-term starter sustainability will be key as well. So that being said, let's get things rolling here, counting down from number 24 until we reach DB1. And that starts us off with a cornerback. What? A cornerback? Yes, a cornerback to kick off the top 24 Dynasty DB show. There aren't a lot that I trust, but there are a handful that I have higher IDP hopes for. And one of those players is my DB24, Tyke Smith of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, Tyke had kind of a volatile role as a rookie, which isn't abnormal whatsoever, especially for a cornerback getting used to the competition at the next level. Plus, he missed some time with injury. That being said, he finished the year averaging about 3/4 of the defensive snaps when he was on the field. He saw a higher rate in the second half of the season as far as snap share goes. Now, Smith is going to be playing almost exclusively in the slot again as the team's nickel corner. And as much as we love these slot guys for IDP, there's naturally going to be some snap fluctuations week to week when the team is in nickel defense less, depending on the offenses that they face, right? So Smith, however, he is one of the more talented corners on the team right now, and them relying on him even more in year two is definitely possible and probably even likely as they look for like more impact defenders. So Smith should definitely, continue to dominate the slot role and potentially stay on to even help defend the run as one of the better run defenders at his position last season, all of which leads to kind of ideal tackle production for the position on top of his big play potential, which was kind of unrealized in 2024. He rushed the passer more than any cornerback last regular season and somehow came away with 0 sacks. Now, this was one of his strengths in his final year at Georgia, so I'd absolutely expect some positive regression there in Todd Bowles' defense that could help him push for those top 12 cornerback numbers as soon as this year. All right, next up is Cooper DeJean. He is not a safety, but he is the second straight cornerback to kick off the list. My CB2 right now for Dynasty, because he was excellent as an NFL rookie, and we should start to see that translate to IDP this season as well. And a big part of why I believe that will happen is the usage in the slot again, and the fact that the team too didn't conform to typical nickel corner deployment with DeJean as a rookie, even when facing like non-11 personnel offenses, which would typically take the nickel off the field. the Eagles left DeJean on there and let him cook, right? That is recognizing how good of a player he is and making sure that his workload reflected that, which really made up for, the first month of the season when he basically didn't see the field at all. And then after the team's bye week, he averaged 84% of the defensive snaps for the rest of the year. Now, he wasn't like this amazing tackler or big play specialist, anything like that, but that can definitely come in 2025 with that slot heavy role. I know there's been some talk about him being utilized as a safety as well. We'll see about that one, but the slot usage is the key here, because even though he was excellent as a rookie in coverage, and usually those like outside lockdown corners, those are the ones we avoid for IDP because teams avoid them in the passing game. Playing in the slot kind of changes that, right? Because you can't ignore the middle of the field, and he's going to be the key corner against the run as well. So there's much more overall volume of tackle potential that he can make up for when he's potentially locking down receivers and maybe not getting the high volume of targets in his direction. So I'm pretty hopeful for DeJean for IDP. We'll keep him in this range for the year. And if it pans out, great. And obviously, I believe it can. And if not, then at the very least, he's going to be a locked-in NFL starter for years to come. So not like we have to worry about a benching or anything disastrous for those feeling like investing relatively early in the position. I suggest we still wait, to be honest, but that's the case with almost anyone on this list that's a defensive back. It's such a deep position and a volatile position that I'd suggest not investing too highly in these guys. But at the same time, someone has to get taken first to 24th at the position. So we need names, and these are them. All right, we'll get into our first safety of the day, new member of the Las Vegas Raiders, Mr. Jeremy Chinn. So for anyone that's been listening to the show for a while, you'll remember that we were pretty bullish on Jeremy Chinn bouncing back last offseason after a couple of down years. And he delivered with a top 20 IDP season for his position, even got himself a 2-year contract now with the Raiders. And a big reason for Chinn's production has been his ability to thrive around the line of scrimmage, which he did in Dan Quinn's defense last year, and I think will do again for Patrick Graham and the Raiders. For anyone that remembers Trayvon Merrick last season in this defense, he played 40% of his defensive snaps in the box, had a breakout IDP season, hit over 100 tackles for the first time in his career. I'm going to project Chinn to deliver similarly, if not maybe even better production. So whenever he's been a starter, he's delivered above average tackle production, which included last season, delivering a 75th percentile mark in tackles versus expected. Now, he's also delivered a number of big plays, which really helped boost his IDP totals. But the reassuring part, I think, when it comes to regression in those big play areas is that he is still one of the better tackle producers at the position, which will keep his weekly floor high, keep him out of that kind of boom bust territories, which is so common for the position. And hopefully he does that for a couple more seasons here, which is why he cracks the top 24 for me in Dynasty. At DB21, I have a player who delivered a breakout season in 2024. That's Quentin Lake of the Los Angeles Rams. As much as I might have been hopeful that Cameron Curl could be productive again for IDP and really in an ideal position to do so, Curl just delivered what was ultimately a real dud of a year. Meanwhile, Lake was clearly the better IDP option and likely the better NFL option as well, where he played mostly in the slot, but really had a diverse deployment throughout the defense. He was versatile enough to play deep, in the box, on the line, and for the most part was a pretty consistent IDP producer for us on a weekly basis. He eventually finished as a top 10 safety overall and top 12 in points per game, delivered 66 percentile mark in tackles versus expected as well. Like, this is a defense that is absolutely better with Lake in it and playing a big part as well. So we'll see what happens with his contract at the end of this season, but have to believe that the Rams are interested in keeping him. I just don't know that for sure. So that's really the only thing that's keeping him from being even higher on this list, really, because really like what we got from Quentin Lake last season. All right, DB20 for me is Talanoa Hufanga, now of the Denver Broncos. Hufanga signed a 3-year contract with Denver this offseason as a free agent, leaving San Francisco after a couple of injury-riddled seasons, right? And that might ultimately be what makes this ranking maybe a little too rich for some, is that he had a full season. He hasn't had a full season since 2022. But again, the Broncos obviously felt good enough to give him this decent-sized contract, which should be very reassuring for dynasty managers, especially when you consider that this team took a chance on another safety with an injury history in free agency last year. And I'd say that worked out massively in their favor when Brandon Jones delivered a breakout year. So Hufanga is definitely talented enough to benefit from, I think, a fresh start in this defense. And last year, he was on an incredible tackle pace through 7 games. He ranked 95th percentile in tackles versus expected per game, and he was 85th percentile in tackles versus expected overall, which is not an easy overall mark to hit on just 7 games. So 9.8 points per game isn't an amazing mark, but remember, points per game for IDP and defensive back especially is not very reliable. IDP is not the same as offense in that regard, so we have to be careful how much we lean into that for our analysis. And one of the biggest standouts for me in Hufanga's 2024 data was that basically I think it was like 100% of his IDP points derived from tackle production. So no big plays. That is not an indictment on him either. Like, that is positive regression screaming to get out, right? Like, if you were a listener of this podcast last year, you might remember that was one of the biggest arguments that I had for Budda Baker to deliver a season one or a safety one season in 2024, was because he was very much still a tackle machine in 2023, but he had next to no big plays. So his IDP production didn't look nearly as strong as it used to heading into 2024. I remember people were kind of down on him. And well, like, I don't like to pump my own tires very often, but I was 100% correct on the Budda Baker thing. He finished as the safety one overall when his great tackle production continued and the big plays positively regressed for him. So it's never a guarantee to happen, but when it comes to like those volatile year to year production numbers, like with big plays for defensive backs, it's always best to play the odds of regression either way, positive or negative, when you find these outlier seasons. And that can absolutely result in Hufanga's best season so far in 2025 and back up this ranking even more. Okay, next up is the first of 2 Green Bay safeties on the list today. And shout out to the Packers, by the way, who, 2 linebackers in the top 24 Dynasty linebackers episode with Edgerrin Cooper and Quay Walker, and now 2 safeties as well, starting with Javon Bullard heading into his second season. And this is absolutely a projection, to be fair, because I am a fan of Bullard, and I don't think his rookie season was like so encouraging or anything like that. He had some inconsistent usage and snap shares throughout the season. And it's not like he had these amazing PFF grades by any means. But here's where I'm hopeful, because obviously this is a young second round pick going into year 2. So that's important for sure. But I would also expect a much bigger and more consistent role this season as well, which will be a big boost to his fantasy production. Bullard snaps, they were all over the place last year. Sometimes he'd play a full-time role. Sometimes he'd play less than 75% of the snaps. And part of that was because he would work in as the nickel corner on occasion, especially when Keyshawn Nixon had to move outside, when Jair Alexander was hurt. And as we talked about with nickel corners, there's some natural inconsistency in their snaps that come with that role. But the team signed Nate Hobbs this offseason, seemingly to fill that nickel role, which should help allow Bullard to settle into a more full-time safety role this season. And that's a big key to this ranking here as DB19, because, he is someone that I have hopes for. He scored like a 91st percentile mark in the safety prospect model coming out of college. So already in a really good spot to be a consistent, relevant starter for us in IDP. He just needs those snaps, which he should get this season. All right, another player whose 2024 wasn't great, but this is one that we should at least have some more familiarity with, and one that has been a reliable IDP for us in the past. That's Kyle Dugger of the New England Patriots. Now, Dugger is coming off a rough 2024 season, at least in terms of PFF grades, like brutal. And that was really a surprise, at least to me, because Dugger has been a good NFL safety. So last year, it does feel a bit like an outlier right now. And if it is, then we can still feel pretty good about Dugger for IDP going forward. It's not enough to push him into like that safety one territory because it was so bad last year. And he's also already 29 years old. But there's still a fair bit to like here for IDP, because Dugger is absolutely still a strong producer at the position. And a big part of that is that he typically owns one of the more box heavy deployments each year. and was the case last year, as nearly half of his snaps were spent in the box. And as a result, he ranked 74th percentile in tackles versus expected. He was like safety 17 in points per game. And that is important because even though he missed time last year, when he's out there, you could see that he's a high-end producer and only a year removed from a top 10 IDP season at the position. So I'd expect a bit of a bounce back for Duggar this year and definitely still has some safety one potential as long as he's healthy. Okay, DB17 is one who has a history of even better IDP production than Kyle Duggar. That is Julian Love of the Seattle Seahawks. This man is coming off his third straight season with over 100 total tackles and a top 12 safety finish for IDP. Love has quickly emerged as one of the more consistent IDP options at an inconsistent position. And that definitely has him worthy of a top 20 DB ranking here for Dynasty as well. He's a great tackler, 93rd percentile in tackles versus expected this past year. Also top 10 graded safety across the board. Now, where there's some concern for long-term value and not a ton, but just enough to keep him outside of that top 15 for me, is that Love really became more of a deep safety last season under Mike Macdonald, which, look, it was still fine for him and can be fine for others as well. There are always strong tackle producers from the deep safety position each year. The problem is that they're typically rare and more of these kind of exceptions to the rule that we're looking for in IDP. And what will usually happen with those types is that we'll see some more volatile production for them in those roles year to year, right? So I worry a little bit about that for Love. Plus, the team drafted a very good safety in Nick Emenwari in the second round this year, a player who does fit that box heavy role and would be the more likely bet to play that role in Seattle over Love, which does at least put Love at some risk for inconsistent production with that less valuable role for our IDP safeties in the defense. But it's not a death knell for Love, who has been very good and can still overcome his circumstances to be an IDP starter for us going forward. But let's stay in Seattle now for DB16 and CB1 in the Dynasty rankings. Devon Witherspoon is the one right now. And there's really so much to like about Witherspoon, whether if you're, wild enough to be the first one to take a corner in your dynasty drafts, Spoon should be the guy you invest in, not just a young former first round pick, but also already putting together a really strong body of work as an IDP with back-to-back seasons ranking among the top 90th percentile in tackles versus expected to start his career, and back-to-back seasons as a top 5 IDP cornerback, which can't be stressed enough just how difficult that is to pull off. But Spoon is proving to be one of the best bets at the position right now and going forward as well. I mean, a big part of his appeal and the reason for his production is the usage as well, playing almost exclusively in the slot, getting some work as a blitzer, and the team putting him in position for these potential big plays. And last year, he didn't even really have the high rate of big plays. Just 12% of his IDP production came on like sacks, interceptions, etc., which was 32nd percentile. So there's room for a little positive regression there, especially considering the player and the usage. So Witherspoon has himself in the conversation as the first cornerback drafted in seasonal leagues again, not just this year, but likely for years to come. So he is CB1 for me. All right, nothing but safeties the rest of the way now. And DB15 for me is going to be Josh Metellus of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I just talked about Kyle Duggar a minute ago, but Metellus has arguably become a newer / better version of Duggar for IDP over the past 2 seasons. He is essentially Minnesota's LB2 that comes with a safety designation for IDP. He played a higher rate of box snaps than any other safety in the league at 50% last year, even ranked 94th percentile in tackles versus expected. That led to his second straight season as a top 12 IDP safety. And there's no real reason to believe that will change in 2025. Even with Cameron Bynum's departure, I know there's some excitement about Theo Jackson, which is fine. But considering that like guys like Harrison Smith and Josh Metellus, they have their set roles in this defense, the more desirable IDP roles as well, by the way. Jackson, like he could still be a good IDP. Playing a full-time role is going to be the main catalyst for that because he's not taking over like the Metellus role. He's taking over Cam Bynum's role, which Bynum was able to make the most of, but it was very much a deep safety role that we typically don't love. And there's no guarantee that a new safety can kind of come in and replicate that production of Bynum. In fact, it's a lot more likely that we get just like average deep safety production based on the role, which is fine, but it's not great, right? Metellus and in redraft Harrison Smith are still very much the safeties we should be targeting in IDP. And Metellus remains a high-end option because of the usage and the production. So really like him. I like what he's done so far, and he cracks the top 15 for me. Okay, on to a couple of those deep safeties who have been great for IDP, starting with DB14, Jesse Bates of the Atlanta Falcons. So Bates delivered another top 12 IDP finish last season and remains one of the best safeties in the NFL. Now, for IDP, his tackle numbers did drop off, which was absolutely expected in 2024. We talked about that last offseason. 2023 was just like an insanely productive year for Bates in the tackle department. And considering his deep safety role, it just wasn't sustainable. And there was a new defensive coordinator coming in, all those kinds of things, right? But where he made up for that was the big plays once again, right? 29% of his IDP production came from those non-tackles. That's a 90th percentile mark for his position. And to be fair, like he is one of the best ball hawks in the league, as he now has, I think, 10 interceptions over the first 2 seasons in Atlanta, which has really helped him for IDP. Now, at some point, those big plays are going to come down and regress closer to the mean, just like his tackles did last year, which kind of leaves us with just an above average deep safety option. But that's still fine for sure. The main thing for me is that I have no concern for Bates being a starter for as long as he wants in the NFL. So that carries significant value for Dynasty and for IDP as well. It's just important to kind of, I think, keep in mind how much to invest in him like year to year, as he'll probably come in ranked a little lower than this when I do my 2025 rankings. So don't be surprised if I continue to temper 2025 IDP expectations for Bates this offseason. That being said, still a big believer in the long-term value. So he's a top 15 Dynasty IDP safety for me for sure. The other deep safety who I like quite a bit is the second Packers safety on the list, Xavier McKinney, another ball hawk in his own right and a great IDP option. McKinney was once again a top 5 graded safety in the league for us here at PFF, both overall and in coverage. It was the second year in a row that that's been the case. So clearly no concerns about him, losing that starting job anytime soon. And he's going to be just 26 years old come week 1. Now, McKinney, much like Jesse Bates, did suffer a bit from tackle regression this past season, also expected because of his deep role, but still finished as a top 20 IDP safety and another one that kind of made his bones on big plays last year. So there's always going to be some concerns for regression there. 30% of his IDP production came from non-tackles, which shouldn't be a big surprise coming off an 8 interception season. I don't think I'm going out on a limb by saying that McKinney's interception numbers will come down in 2025. So we need to kind of brace for that, but his snaps aren't going anywhere for the next few years at the very least, right? And still a high-end IDP safety that I'm happy to invest in within the top 15 for Dynasty, even if he's outside the top 15 in my redraft rank. So spoilers, I guess, for that once we get there. All right, on to the safety ones now, the top 12 Dynasty defensive backs, and that starts with the constantly underrated Grant Delpit of the Cleveland Browns. Now, Delpit has been one of the better tacklers at the position over the past few seasons. He ranked 85th percentile in tackles versus expected in each of the past 2 years, and he was a top 15 safety in IDP points per game over that span as well. And a big reason for that is that Delpit is getting this ideal box deployment within Jim Schwartz's defense. He played 46% of his defensive snaps in the box last year, which was 8th among qualifying safeties. He performed perfectly fine in terms of PFF grades. He's a former second-round pick and just 26 years old. I really like Delpit. I think there's even some untapped potential in his game in the form of those big plays, because just 8% of his IDP production last year came from non-tackles, which was like 21st percentile. So there's absolutely room for positive variance there just as a full-time safety, but also given the role within the defense, playing so close to the line of scrimmage and getting those pass rush snaps as well. Like he ranked top 10 at the position in pass rush snaps in each of the past 2 seasons under Jim Schwartz, but hasn't had more than 1.5 sacks in a season. Again, there's a ton of variance built into sack numbers. So we could see that usage lead to much better sack numbers as soon as 2025. So when you consider there's no concern for his tackle numbers, the usage, the snaps, building in that big play potential at least creates high expectations for me as both a dynasty IDP and a top 2025 IDP safety as well. Okay, up next, a player who I loved heading into last year, and things were going really well until he suffered a concussion. That's Jaquan Brisker of the Chicago Bears. Now, last year's concussion was scary because he suffered that in week 5, I believe it was, and didn't return for the rest of the season. That was a major concern, and honestly, probably a big reason for me why I don't have him even higher on this list. However, he remains in the top 12 because he appears to be back on track for a healthy 2025, which is huge because when he's on the field for IDP over the last 2.5 seasons, basically, he has been an excellent fantasy producer for us. 2023 was the best version of Brisker so far, but 2024 was shaping up to be an even better year prior to the conky, right? Like he was safety 4 in points per game and ranked 90th percentile in tackles versus expected per game, which is a great number if we can project that across an entire season. And it's why he ranked 98th percentile in tackles versus expected in 2023 and could have got back there in 2024 if he was healthy. But instead, we'll project to 2025 where he should remain a box heavy safety who can produce great tackle numbers for us. And if he remains healthy, he is absolutely in the conversation for a top 12 finish, if not better, in 2025. He's also a former second rounder, just turned 26. So there's plenty of runway for him to kind of continue on as a high-end IDP producer for years to come here. And that brings us to my safety 10 and another player who I have high hopes for in 2025 in what should absolutely be a breakout season. That's Jordan Battle of the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, again, this might be another name that people deem to be too high in the ranks because he hasn't necessarily been an IDP starter for us through his first 2 seasons in the league, but that's okay because I believe he will put any of those concerns aside this year as he finally gets a chance to start from the beginning of the year to the end of the year here in year 3 for him. And it's not just a starting role that has me hopeful, obviously, but more so that anytime he's been on the field, he's been an elite tackler, which is crucial for him to separate himself among the rest of the pack. In 2023, he ranked 97th percentile in tackles versus expected, and last year was 88th percentile despite not playing more than 524 defensive snaps in a season. Again, the Bengals, they have no option but to finally give this young, promising 2023 third-round pick a starting job, and I think he can absolutely deliver for IDP in that role. He played 47% of his defensive snaps in the box last season. He should continue to be the primary option to rotate down toward the line of scrimmage, and that is going to fuel his ability to produce those top-tier tackle numbers for the position. Like, this is exactly the type of player that we should be investing in for IDP because he doesn't come with this high price tag right now. Like, yes, I have him as safety 10 in Dynasty, but most places I suspect will not. So he's a great option to buy now before his stock explodes with a breakout 2025 season. And it's why I'm comfortable calling my shot here with Battle as safety 10. Again, for IDP purposes, I think he could be a great starter for us, not just this year, but for beyond as well. Okay, Brandon Jones of the Denver Broncos is my safety 9 for Dynasty, and what a year he is coming off of in 2024. I referenced Jones earlier talking about his teammate Talanoa Hufanga, and Jones was a player that I have been excited about for a while because similarly to Jordan Battle, even though he never had that full season under his belt as a starter, his tackles versus expected numbers were super promising should he finally get that role, right? And that's exactly what happened in 2024. He played nearly 1,000 snaps for the first time in his career. He ranked 97th percentile in tackles versus expected. He ranked as the safety 5 for IDP, both overall and in points per game. And he was a top 5 for PFF, both overall and in coverage. So everything came up Millhouse for Brandon Jones last year, and I could finally maybe feel a little bit validated and getting excited about his IDP potential for the past few years because it all came together in 2024. Even without an elite box snap rate last season, all of his past tackle efficiency numbers pointed to a player who can overcome the role and produce for IDP, and Jones did just that. So I have no concerns about him repeating his great IDP production from 2024 here into 2025. And with a nice contract and encouraging grades / performance to back him up, like, he should remain an NFL starter for us for a while longer, which has me excited about him in Dynasty. Okay, safety 8 for me in Dynasty was the safety 1 overall last season, the legendary Budda Baker, who put together an insane season in 2024. He finished second in the entire league in total tackles, putting up 62 tackles over expected. I cannot stress enough how bonkers that number is. That's nearly 4 extra tackles per game relative to the position, a rate that will be, I'd say, nearly impossible to replicate, not just for him, but any player really. Like, that is absolutely nuts. Then he goes on and adds 32% of his fantasy production from non-tackles as well. Like, that's how he clearly, like, far and away was the safety 1 overall points per game, and the IDP 1 overall last year for us as well, at least in our scoring. So look, I mentioned it before, how I had Budda bouncing back in 2024, but not even I could have predicted just how much he'd lean into that bounce back, to the point where it was a career year in terms of production for him. Now, Budda is almost certainly going to be drafted as the safety 1 or very close to it this season now. And that's fine. I think he's still in a strong position to be a weekly IDP starter for us. I just don't want to see even a single person be surprised if his weekly production isn't as good as it was last year. Not one, okay? Because I know someone is going to ask me at some point next season, what's wrong with Budda? This time last year, he was this and this and that. When the obvious answer is going to be that just those 2024 numbers are too insane to replicate. Like, if he hits 160 something tackles again as the overall IDP 1, I don't know. I'll eat my hat or something, because that just shouldn't be the expectation for a safety in any season, really. So I still think he's awesome. He's a great IDP option. It's why he's safety 8 for me in Dynasty, and probably going to be one of the higher ranked safeties for me in 2025 as well. Just not setting that level of expectations again, because 2024 was absolutely nuts. In fact, there's probably really no player at the position who is capable of delivering such high-end consistency, except for one, maybe, and that one being my safety 7 king, Derwin James. Look, I'm ashamed to admit that this is probably the lowest that I've had Derwin in my Dynasty rankings for a very long time. Maybe lowest ever, now that I think about it. But it's also still a high ranking for a soon to be 29-year-old safety, right? Because, like I said, Derwin is truly the most consistent safety at a super volatile position, and he does it at a high level every year. He has 4 straight seasons as a top 6 IDP safety. Coming into last year, he was no worse than 98th percentile in tackles versus expected in each season since 2021, because of that elite tackling ability, which, to be fair, that tackling ability did drop off a little last year for Derwin under the new coaching staff. And that's kind of where my hesitance comes from as well, I guess, on top of him getting slightly older, at least why he's outside my top 5 right now. He was 50th percentile in tackles versus expected in 2024, which is fine, but it could signify either maybe a more uncomfortable fit to get to the ball carrier easier in this new Chargers defense under Harbaugh and Minter, or it could be that we're seeing that potential decline in production as he enters year 7 of his career. Neither is impossible, though it could also just end up being an outlier, and he gets right back to his elite tackling ways in 2025. I wouldn't be surprised either way. Ultimately, though, there needed to be some room for some of the younger talent coming in who I have high hopes for longer term than Derwin right now. And as much as I love Derwin and will keep him in that safety 1 territory this year as well, it just didn't make sense to have him much lower for Dynasty, or much higher than my current top 6, I guess. And I'll start with number 6 in the safety rankings. So that is first-round rookie Malachi Starks of the Baltimore Ravens. He is 21 years old, coming out of Georgia, an elite scorer in the safety prospect model, which puts him in that success rate range where 60% of prospect scorers of 8.5 or more at the safety position in the model delivered top 12 IDP seasons. 85% delivered top 24 and 90% delivered top 36. So he comes baked in with this perfect floor and a strong chance of top 12 upside. Even if I don't think he'll hit right away as a rookie, there's reason to be excited about him long term based on everything else he has going for him coming out and according to the model. With, the other thing that helps him too, Darius Washington's injury. There's nobody standing really in his way to start right away as a rookie. So it'll likely be more in that deep role, but this is also a player who is going to have a long path to playing time for years to come in the NFL. And as I've been saying, that alone carries value. So you bake in everything else, and we should absolutely consider him one of the top safety options in Dynasty. And very similar feelings for safety 5 on the list. Another rookie, my safety 1 in rookie drafts, Nick Emenwari of the Seattle Seahawks. Now, if you listen to / read any of the IDP rookie content this season, you'll know that I'm bullish on Emenwari's IDP potential. And if you didn't read or watch that stuff, shame on you. Get to reading and consuming. My family is starving, guys. But no, I'm very excited about the IDP potential for Emenwari, and I should be clear that there is a chance that he doesn't hit in year one. We see teams ease rookies in all the time, and just because Emenwari was highly drafted doesn't make him exempt from that rule. But for Dynasty, it's all systems go here, especially after he gets his feet wet as a rookie. And that's kind of my year one expectation, is that he maybe doesn't get a full-time role right away, but he still factors in certain packages, specifically when the team goes to like one linebacker looks like they did last year. Pretty often, especially with Tyrese Knight in the lineup, they took him off the field in key situations. And Emenwari can absolutely play that second linebacker role because he is a beast for the position. He comes out of college with ideal box experience, so there's no concerns about him not being able to play that role in the NFL. Obviously a super athlete, and it's made him an elite tackler in college as well, which will be the key to him doing the same at the next level, is that box role. Now, similar to Starks as well, where they both earned identical prospect model scores, so all those success rates that I mentioned with Starks, they translate to Emenwari's potential as well. Maybe even more so if he's going to continue to dominate those ideal IDP alignments at the next level. So yes, you may think top 5 IDP dynasty safety is too high for a player who hasn't played yet, but my projection of him long term easily puts him in this range, and we have to be able to project forward for dynasty and not just go off, points per game and past fantasy points, stuff like that, which doesn't correlate strongly on its own year to year for IDP. So invest highly in Emenwari now, and even if his playing time isn't ideal as the season begins, get in there, try to buy low, because he is made in a lab to be our ideal IDP safety going forward. And once he does take over that starting role, he should be an elite asset. Now, a player who did play in 2024 and scored even slightly above Starks and Emenwari in the safety prospect model coming out as a rookie last season is my safety 4 for Dynasty. That's Tyler Nubin of the New York Giants. And man, Nubin did not disappoint as a rookie. Even though he missed time with injury, there's nothing much that we can do about that. But when he was out there, he was like the prototype IDP safety that we craved. He ranked 95th percentile tackles versus expected. He delivered nearly 2 tackles over expected per game on the year. He was safety 15 in points per game as a rookie. And he is another one where when you look at his IDP production from non-tackles, just 2.3%. No sacks, no interceptions. There is so much room for him to even improve on his IDP production when the big plays start falling his way. So, which again, it will just happen as natural variance comes into those statistics. But we need to focus in on the things that were more in the control of the player, which was his tackling. And the fact that he delivered this elite tackling season as a rookie has me very hyped about his long-term IDP potential. Hopefully he's healthy this year, which he should be, but comes with round 2 NFL draft capital. He'll be turning 24 next week, I believe. But the role is great, played about 39% of his snaps in the box. He should remain the primary box going forward. So needless to say, I'm very bullish on Tyler Nubin, both for this season and for Dynasty. Which takes us into the top 3, starting with safety 3, Antoine Winfield Jr., one of the league's best young stars at the position. And if not for injury last season, he would have likely delivered another top 12 IDP finish. Unfortunately, injuries happen to all players. We can't control that. We can't punish players too much for when it does happen to them either. But because, Winfield, you look at him, he was safety 9 in points per game last year. And importantly, as I've been highlighting with a lot of these players, he continued to be an elite tackler at the position. He ranked 88th percentile in tackles versus expected after ranking 95th percentile in 2023. He did this on just 528 defensive snaps in 2024. So there's reason to believe in improvement there across an entire season and a chance to bounce back to that 2023 production. Winfield still very much considered one of the top safeties in the league, and he's signed through like the 2027 season as well, so he isn't going anywhere. That's great for him to continue producing at a high level in Todd Bowles' defense. We've obviously seen it from him before, and that high-end IDP production is far from over, in my opinion, where we should continue to squeeze a lot more IDP juice out of Winfield Jr. and keep him among the elite dynasty safeties as well. Speaking of elite, these next two are in a tier of their own because I have Newman and Winfield pretty close in tier 2, but these next two are clear tier 1 options for me. And honestly, rank them however you like between the two. I'm not going to argue with you either way. They're pretty interchangeable in my opinion, but I'll start with, we'll call him 1B, Kyle Hamilton of the Baltimore Ravens, with out of doubt, one of, if not already, the best safety in the NFL. It's actually pretty crazy that he has already lived up to the hype coming out of college to the point where he's delivered at least a top 10 finish in PFF grade for the position every year that he's been in the league so far. And then adding in the IDP hype that we had for him coming out, he had like a 98th percentile score in the prospect model coming out. And he's delivered on that as well, where he's now been a safety 1 in points per game in each of the past 2 seasons. So yes, it was going to be impossible to not have him in the top 2 for me in Dynasty, and arguably going to be a perennial top 5 option in seasonal formats as well. So the usage has been and should continue to be solid. 36% in the box last year, was top 10 in pass rush attempts, where he's doing it enough to create some sack upside, but not so much that it's a detriment to his tackle production. So just a really perfectly balanced usage from a high-end player is what we should expect from Hamilton, and that's translated strongly to IDP production for him. So I have no reason to believe that he'll be anything less than that for a long time going forward. Now, my safety 1/1A in these dynasty ranks had the slightest tiebreaker that I'll get into, but that player is Brian Branch of the Detroit Lions. And even though Branch doesn't necessarily get the ideal usage that Hamilton does, what he's done with what he does get is pretty absurd in terms of production through his first 2 seasons. Really, really efficient work from Branch in both NFL seasons, even as a rookie, where he didn't play a full-time role, but he still delivered elite tackle production. He ranked 97th percentile in tackles versus expected as a rookie, 96th percentile this year on a larger workload, and that translated to IDP both years as well, with this past season resulting in safety 3 numbers overall and in points per game. He is so efficient with his opportunities. It's very Alex Kingleton-esque, or to compare to the other side of the ball, and his teammate Jahmyr Gibbs-esque, right? In just how much he does with the snaps he's given. It's difficult to find another young safety with that level of efficiency and production, who is also, going to be a top NFL safety for years to come. He was the top graded safety in run defense this past year. He ranked top 15 overall. So Branch, Kyle Hamilton, both of these guys, they are the exact type of high-end young safeties that we should have no problem with at the top of the rankings, because look, we're going to have to pay up for them. There's no doubt about that. So if you really want them, then you need to be prepared to pay like that safety 1 or safety 2 overall sticker price. And that price might actually be worth it, considering what they've done so far and how much they can still provide for so many years to come. But yeah, that's the top 24. A lot of detail packed into my top 24 dynasty defensive backs. So really hope you guys found that helpful. And please do like and subscribe to the channel if you did. I would greatly appreciate that. But that's it for this week. If you want the full top 300 dynasty rankings, go to our rankings page on pff.com, where all the updates are housed there, because I can't help but tinker. Even after the article dropped post NFL draft, several changes have been made, and you guys got to see them first here in these episodes. So again, thank you all for watching. Let's do it again next week. We'll talk top 24 dynasty edges, but until then, peace out.